Welcome to the Office Addins Developer Community Call. So to get started, you're new to the call. Here's a few notes about the community call. There's a link here at the top of the slide, which is an invite to the calls. The next call is coming up on Wednesday, January 8th, 2020. The call is the second Wednesday of each month. And it's an opportunity to meet the product teams behind Office Addins platform and APIs. We try to cover a variety of topics in each call. We typically talk about what's new, what's coming soon, and do a technical deep dive into one particular area of the Office Addins platform. It's also an opportunity to see customer presentations. So sometimes our own peers from the community will present on various solutions that they've built or techniques that they've learned and they share with others. And you can do Q&A with the product team. So there is a form where you can submit your questions in advance, which I'll share a link to that later. You can also ask questions as we go along. So feel free to post your questions into the chat, and we will answer those as we go along at the end of each section, or possibly at the end of the call. If there's any questions we aren't able to get answered today, we post a blog in a few days that has the summary of the Q&A, and we post all the answers there. So you'll have those. So here's the agenda of what we're covering today. So for any folks that are new to Office Addins, we do a quick little overview of what they're all about. Then we're going to talk about Outlook Autorun and signature scenarios. Then we're going to take a look at some learning paths in docs. And then we have a new PNP sample to share out on a migration strategy for sharing code from a VSTO add-in to an Office web add-in. And we'll have some Q&A. So your presenters for today, my name's David Chesnut, and I'm a dev writer on the Office platform team. And joining me today is Alex, who's also a dev writer, and he's helping me host the call. Juan is joining us, who's a senior program manager with the Outlook team. We'll be talking about the Autorun and signature scenarios in a bit. And also Ricky is joining us, who's also a senior dev writer on the Office platform team. So a lot of writers today. We'll be talking about learning paths. Switch over to Office Addins.
All right. Like David said, we like to start every call with just a brief overview of what Office Addins are, so make sure we're all on the same page and in the right place. So an Office Add-in is a way to extend Office, to extend your Office hosts such as Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or Outlook. The add-in is composed of two parts. One is a web service. So it is written using familiar web technologies such as JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. That is hosted out there on the web. The other part is a manifest file that is what configures your Office host, like Excel, to point to that add-in and know how to use it. This manifest file is the only part that gets put on a user's machine, so that's the only part they need to reference, making it cross-platform. So you can have this manifest file on your desktop, on your iPad, or using an Office for the web client. You can even upload this manifest file to the store and allow other people to download it and use your add-in. Now, what can your add-in do? Well, because it's a web service, you can call any other web APIs, any Azure services. You can use the power of the Microsoft Graph. But for this call, we typically focus on the Office.js libraries. These libraries extend and allow access to the Office hosts, such as Excel and Word. So you can interact directly with your spreadsheet, with your message, with your appointment, and so forth. So that's what we'll be digging into in this call for Outlook. David? If you head over to our documentation site, you can try out add-ins. We have some quick starts that will get you a working add-in within 5 minutes. You can also learn all about the platform through various tutorials and other such things. So head on over to this link. I'll paste in the chat in a second, and I'll hand it back over to you, David. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Let's switch over to Outlook.
Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. This is Juan Balmori. I'm a program manager in Outlook Extensibility. And this morning, I'm going to talk about a few interesting scenarios that the team is currently working on. This is actually something that it's really on the early design stages. And my goal for today is to share with you what we're thinking and get your feedback. So I'm going to talk about Autorun and the signatures scenario that we're planning to enable for Outlook Addins. So first of all, before we go into the topic, a friendly reminder that we recently released our Mailbox 1.8 API. That means that you can actually use all these new features in a production environment with Outlook add-ins, such as block consents, delegate access, so you can support now shared folders. We support activating add-ins on shared folders. We added a bunch of APIs to increment the location and meetings if you want to allocate resources, reserve rooms and stuff. We also added some attachments API, internet headers, and categories. So go to this link. All the information and details is here, and start taking advantage of it. So with that, so I'm going to start by describing what we call Autorun internally here in the team. I don't know what's going to be the final name, but basically the idea is that usually add-ins in Outlook are, if you want to use an add-in, most of you are creating add-in commands. So basically you need to click on a button on the ribbon so that we can actually show a task ping, or rather, run kind of a UI-less action. But it requires the user to actually click on the button. So with the exception of the new scenarios that we shipped on send event, most of the code execution happens when the user actually takes an action. So the goal of this feature is to kind of enable you guys to, to run some code in the background, in some conditions that I'm going to describe in detail. So, and then the other thing is that we're planning to run this JavaScript code in a React Native runtime. So it's going to be more efficient than, instantiating the whole browser. So, we want to make add-ins more efficient for some scenarios. We want to reduce, potential complexity or discoverability of add-ins by just auto-running them. We also know that this is a gap that we have against against COM add-ins, that you can actually be running code behind the scenes, and we want to unlock new scenarios that our community has been asking us. So this is why we think that this is something that we need to enable. So how it works. So the way that we are planning to enable this is to support certain events within Outlook so that we can initiate or handle such events with code. Like, for example, and this is something this is an area that I would like to hear your feedback. We are planning to enable a few events, like, for example, when you are composing an email, when you're creating a new email, when you're replying, when a new appointment is created. It's going to be on a specific set of events that we will enable you to add handlers. I'm going to describe which of those events we are thinking about. Okay. Now, once the event happens, your background code is going to be running for around, it's kind of a random number right now, but it's not going to die just after the event happens or after your code completes execution. Remember that add-ins are, in essence, a browser that is running within Office application. So one thing that we're trying to optimize is that if you have multiple add-ins that are kind of potentially running on these events, we want to avoid, some instability on the experience of the product. We want to optimize how do we do memory and stuff like that. So basically, so it's going to be running a little bit after the event, and then you can also drive, the termination of the Autorun. So we're going to be providing API so that you can just complete it and then save resources. Now the other thing here is that, again, this is going to be enabled for some specific scenarios. So please don't confuse this feature with something that is permanently running on the background, because this is not what it is. It's basically with some specific events, and we want to know what events are relevant for you. So that's the basic gist. Okay. So now the way that we are planning to enable this is by adding a few more extension points within the manifest. So basically, if you want this current thinking, again, if you have feedback, please let us know. But the idea is that we are going to open a new element within the manifest that we're going to be able to declare that your add-in supports Autorun. So basically, you have to declare the runtimes element. And then there are a few new extension points that you can use. For example, what you see here is that we'll have events on new message compose, creating new emails or creating new appointments. And we are also planning to support when you add attachments to a message or an appointment. So these are 4 different events that we have identified as strong candidates to support this functionality. And we think that this is going to enable, many of the scenarios that you have been asking. Again, feel free to comment on this, send us feedback about this, and we want to hear back from you. So once you declare this in your, what you can see here is that we have the events, and then we have a reference to a function name. So basically, this is kind of a function that obviously needs to exist on the referred resources. So basically, our public functions that are on your on a specific JavaScript file that you can reference in the manifest as well. Just as what you do today with non-visible actions commands, or what you do today with the onSend event. Okay, so basically when that event happens, we're going to call that method that you're referring on these entries. It's pretty straightforward, but again, it's a manifest change. Sorry about that, but this is basically how we extend new capabilities. Now, we have seen many scenarios that require, this is just to give you ideas of how you can use these new capabilities. Message tracking is one of them. So the idea here is that you can, we have many partners that are building, tracking email solutions. And basically the way they work is that they insert an invisible pixel on email. So this is something that you can use that, for example, when someone creates a new email, you can insert a pixel on it. The other one is pending signatures, which is the other feature that I'm going to be talking about today. We can provide additional functionality for signatures, that are a little bit more rich than what is exposed in the product out of the box. And finally, other idea or type of scenario that you could think about is attachment to cloud link. So basically, the idea is that if someone is adding an attachment that is very heavy, you can listen to the event that the attachment was added, and then basically replace it with a link to, a cloud location of the same file. This will make your email, more efficient. So these are just 3 of some scenarios that you can enable with this functionality. And let's drill down a little bit more into time. Okay, let's drill down a little bit in the signature scenarios. Do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, so we did have someone asking about block on send and if it's available for Outlook mobile.
Not yet for mobile. It's on the backlog, so that's a good question. So we, as part of 1.8, we released a capability of onSend event. It's actually an event that gets triggered when you send an email, and you have the capability of canceling the send of an email. That was released supported right now in the latest updates for Windows Online and Mac. And it's in our backlog to also support it in mobile, but I don't have a concrete timeline for it. Cool. So let's keep going. So signature scenarios. So right now, what we have identified is that there are a few gaps in the out-of-the-box Outlook signature capabilities. So for instance, you cannot have a common signature across Outlook clients. So basically what it's of interest here is that we have the same signature in all the platforms, no? And then limited options for admin control of signatures. So for example, no pictures are allowed. You can't see the signature. There are some scenarios where the signatures are actually stamped on the server. So basically you don't have a way of looking at, what is the actual signature that is going to go with your email, and or insert signatures directly under a new email. And then lack of customization and design options for the signature is also something that we don't have. That is not a very rich experience. And of course, as part of this, there are some scenarios in some enterprises where having a signature has in cases legal requirements or so that we need to fill up. So those are things that are kind of out of scope in the product. And of course, we have partners, we have multiple ISVs and partners who are doing a business on this. So compliance is the scenario that I was referring to. So by compliance, you have to have a signature by compliance. And there are many different types of implementations right now. No, so this is some of the patterns that are being done today to enable the signature scenarios. Like for example, we have Addins that actually do this, and the way they actually work is that it happens to be that there is a registry entry that you can actually change to add signatures, and basically Outlook what it's doing is going to those registry settings, signatures folder, grabbing the signatures from there, and then just composing it. So basically, either the Addins or a Windows application plus Exchange command, PowerShell commandlets are basically, pulling and posting data into those registry entries, and then you just magically show up in Outlook for Windows. Again, this is Outlook for Windows. I have to say that the Outlook team is currently working on a feature that is going to run those signatures. So soon it's going to go beyond Windows, right? But still don't have the capabilities to provide compliance services and the things that I described previously. So and then there are other types of solutions that where the signature stamping happens on the server. So basically here, what happens is that the user creates an email, sends it, and then on the server, the signature is added before the email is actually sent to wherever it needs to go. Of course, the big gap here is that the user doesn't have a clue of what was included on the email until he goes to the send folder and says, "Oh, okay, this is what was added." No? So it's in some cases that makes sense. In others, it's kind of weird. But this is what we have seen partners in the signature space implementing, and to some degree, the functionality that we want to enable for to solve both of those scenarios. So the proposed solution here is, we're going to have the Autorun functionality. So basically, you're going to be able to run code when the message is composed. You create a new email, and then we're going to enable a few APIs that you can use specifically for the signature scenario. So the APIs that we have today are get compose type. So with that API, what we are doing is that we are allowing you to check what type of email you are writing, if it's a brand new email or if you're replying or forwarding an email. So basically you have, and each of those three types of compose, you might have different signature experiences. So this API is to tell you, hey, what type of message is being done right now. And then we have two other APIs to check if there is a client signature currently active in Outlook. So that means if the user has already configured a signature, and if you want to disable that capability or not. So if the user acquires this add-in, obviously the signatures that are currently configured in Outlook will be replaced with the signature that is provided by the add-in. And finally, we have an insert signature API, which is an API that allows you to replace a signature that is currently on the email with a new one, coming from a service. So the flow is basically like that, no? So you create a new email, Autorun gets launched, you check the configuration, what type of message you're dealing with, and then finally the email signature is replaced through the APIs. Okay. We're going to post this deck at some point during the call, so that you can check it afterwards and think about it and send us feedback about this. But it's pretty straightforward, no? Well, how this is going to look, sorry, I think these images are not very clear, but what I'm showing on the left is a default signature that it's configured, in this case, in Outlook Web Access. So on Outlook Online, you can create a signature for your emails. And then basically, if you have an add-in that it's supporting these scenarios, when you are composing a new message on the right, you will see that instead of showing, your kind of configured signature, given that you have this awesome add-in that is providing you with new signatures, the new signature is going to be added or replaced in the email. So this is how the end user it's going to look like in the case of new message. Of course, you can provide different experiences for reply and forward. That's basically it. So the design is kind of straightforward. So I wonder if anybody has any questions or feedback so far.
There were a couple of questions that came up. So
cool.
One was, will the Autorun feature also allow the add-in to open a task pane?
That's a good one. That's a good question. It's still not yet defined. We're thinking about. It's a very good question actually, because there are many customers that actually would like to not only have kind of UI-less actions, but also showing a task pane in this case. We are thinking about enabling that. It's not yet defined exactly how that's going to work, but this is great. I mean, it's great that you are giving us this feedback. We are definitely considering to enable that. It's not yet in the current designs.
Also related to the signature, when will Graph support Office setting the default signature for a user's mailbox?
I think the Graph, if not already, it's also going to have a few APIs for this. That is a good question because, if you have a Graph API to insert signatures, then that is awesome because you can have a web application or a Windows app that is using the Graph to configure your signatures. But at the same time, independently of that being enabled, we also want to make sure that the functionality is available directly in Office.js, because we have seen that there are environments. We have received this feedback from customers that number one, it's in some cases they don't have access to the APIs for whatever reason. Customers are still not exposing certain capabilities, but also it's not embedded in the Outlook experience. So it's going to be a Graph plus Office.js type of solution.
We have one more. There was a follow-up to the opening a task pane. Would it be possible to open the task pane of a different add-in? They be unrelated add-ins?
Well, this is a great question. I would be interested to follow up on that if you don't mind. One of the challenges on the design of opening a task pane is what should we allow to be on the task pane. Ideally, would be a page that it's part of the add-in, that it's in the same domain. For security reasons, probably will not expose jumping domains. We cannot even do it with the current infrastructure. So I will be interested to learn more about that. But ideally, it should be a page that is in the same domain of your add-in, something that is under discussion. So it's great that there's curiosity about it. I have a set of questions that I would love to hear from you. The first one is around Autorun. I shared with you that we are planning to support right now 4 events, which are basically new mail, new appointment, and then adding attachments to mail and appointment. So it's 4 events that we have considered today. I wonder if for your solutions, if that accommodates your needs, or you're thinking about other types of events that we should support. that will be super important that we know about, because so far we only have those 4 events. So if anyone has any feedback on this, it will be awesome to learn. And the other one is, when you think about the manifest annotations, I share with you that we basically need to add 2 things in the manifest to enable this. Adding the runtimes element plus indicating the specific events that you want to support. So I guess that's very not straightforward, but it's kind of business as usual when it comes to Outlook add-ins, and many features require new extension points. So if you have any feedback on that aspect, would be good to learn. And then for signatures, what do you think about the workflows? If you are in this business, or if that the APIs that I shared around signatures, I wonder if the flow makes sense. Also give us feedback about the specific APIs, the 4 APIs that we added, that completes your scenario. If we need to add additional capabilities, it would be awesome to learn. And finally, this is something that a few partners were asking us about. How relevant is offline for your scenarios? So the capability of, you're in a disconnected environment and you still want to use your signatures. How relevant is that to your scenarios? We have something to deal with that. So that will be also something that we'd like to learn from you. If there are no questions in the call, in the email from this call, we can send you details on work. You can actually send us this feedback so that we can follow up.
I think that's probably a good call to follow up. There are some follow-up questions to some stuff you've brought up, but I think that the chat and proceeding the call is probably the better option to not get it too far in the weeds.
That's okay. How do you want folks, we'll post the slides to the Office Developer blog in a few days. Is there a forum or somewhere for folks to go if they have additional feedback after this?
Yes. What I'm planning to do is we'll include this presentation on the blog post as well.
Yep.
And then I will provide a link to GitHub issue, so where you guys can drop the feedback.
All right.
And that way we can effectively track it.
Yeah, we'll just put that link in the blog post.
Yeah. All right, let's do that. Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Juan. Great info. We're going to talk about learning paths with Ricky.
Okay. Speaking of GitHub issues for feedback, that's what my presentation is all about. We have been thinking for some months now of adding something called learning paths to our Office Add-in developer documentation. And a simple rule of thumb definition of a learning path is it's a sequence of articles or videos, other media, that's intended to provide developers with guidance about a subject that's just too big or too complex to be a single article. For example, all the ways that you can work with manifests. Another example is the various things you need to do and learn if you're transitioning from our older add-in models to web add-in models. So what we've done is we've set up this GitHub issue, and there's a link there at the bottom of the slide, issue 1486. And what we've done there is presented a few more examples. I think we have maybe 10 of them there, like the ones here on the slide. And we're asking you to give us feedback on which of these learning paths would be valuable to you, which would not be valuable, and also to suggest learning paths of your own that aren't on our list. So if you would do that, that would be great. And we'll use that to prioritize which learning paths we should create and get cracking on that within the next few weeks.
All right. Thanks, Ricky. All right, moving along. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about a new patterns and practice sample that we have that will be published sometime the next day or two. It is out on GitHub. You can go look at it. It's just not in the master branch yet. But what this is all about is a scenario where you have a VSTO add-in that works well today, and you're looking into moving to Office Web Add-ins, And so what are some strategies for doing that to, to reduce cost and take advantage of the features that you want to take advantage of? And so this sample is really kind of part one of, I'm sure, like additional samples we're going to have in this space. So this particular one is looking at, okay, so you have your VSTO add-in, say it runs in Excel. It's written using .NET and maybe C# or VB. And today it runs on Office on Windows, and that's its restriction. So you might say, well, why would I move to an Office web add-in? So the big reason to go to web add-ins is that they can run across platforms. So they run on Office on Windows, but they also run on Mac and mobile and online. So if you want your users, as they move from platform to platform, to still be able to use your add-in, the Office web add-in is a great story for that. So you say, okay, so I want to do that. So does that mean I throw away my VSTO code and just rewrite everything in Office.js, JavaScript, and TypeScript? You might not want to do that. For one thing, there are many users out there still in old versions of Office, which may or may not have the ability to run Office web add-ins, depending on who it is. May not have necessarily all the features that Office web add-ins have, but your VSTO add-in will run fine. Another reason you'll probably want to stick with your VSTO add-in is that Office.js might not necessarily support all the APIs you need. If you're working in Excel or Outlook, there's probably, most APIs are there now. It's a pretty good story. If you're working in Word or PowerPoint, like there's still some APIs that are going to be missing. And so you have to do some analysis to figure out, well, what features can I move over and what can't I? So a good hybrid approach is to keep the VSTO add-in and also have the Office web add-in as a complement to it, so that if on Windows, if folks need all the functionality, they have the VSTO add-in. If they move cross-platform, they may or may not have all the functionality, but at least they'll have some. And so you're not completely, not running on cross-platform. So this specific sample is about how can you share code between the two? Because if you build a VSTO add, well, if you have a VSTO add-in, and then you're going to just rewrite everything in Office web add-in, you're going to have two code bases, and that starts to get costly. So how can we share code so that you can avoid rewriting code where possible? That's where this sample comes in. So the idea is, let's take the logic, the algorithms, functionality of that VSTO add-in, and move it into a shared code library, keeping it in C#, whatever language it's written in, and put it in the cloud. So your VSTO add-in is still using that code. And then you share it out to the Office web add-in through REST API calls. So basically, you're just going to put a REST API wrapper on it, in that shared code library, and now your Office web add-in gets all that functionality. And the advantage is that if you need to fix a bug, or you decide you want to add a new feature, you can put that into the shared code library, and both the VSTO add-in and the Office web add-in get that update without you having to do it twice. So it's going to cut down on some cost. Let me switch to a demo to show how the sample works. And I'm going to go to, all right, so Visual Studio 2019. Make this text bigger. Just realized I haven't done that in Visual Studio. So basically, let me just run this and just show you what we have here. What this code is. Yeah. Down the bottom. Aha. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. This is a VSTO custom tasking add-in, and it runs this little add-in called the cell analyzer. So basically, I can type some text into a cell somewhere. And then when I click on the Show Unicode button over here, it grabs the text out of that cell, whatever cell's selected, and then for each character, it shows what the Unicode value is for it. So it's not super interesting, but it's just, for purposes of sample to show, scenario of like, okay, so how would I share some of this code over to an Office web add-in so that I can run cross-platform? So let's go back and take a look at code. So in here, we can see, I've got my win form with the Show Unicode button and the result text. And what's happening is in the code for this, my first step is I need to do some analysis. So, if we go through the code, we see that first we have document code, which means this is interacting through the primary interop assemblies and getting the cell text, so from the document. So we have this range cell range, and then we get our active cell, and then we get the string out of that cell. And then next we go into the algorithm code, which is now we're going to start doing some processing on that string. So basically for every character that's in that cell, we're going to get the Unicode value and construct a new string of, on every line of that string is one of the characters and its Unicode value. And then finally, we have some UI code, which is basically our WinForm code, where we're going to take that result and put it into the custom task page. So this is basically thinking about these three areas. So like document code isn't really going to, you can't really share that forward to Office.js because the Office.js APIs are asynchronous and they're slightly different. So we can't reuse that. UI code is also the same issue where, WinForm is not how Office.js works. Office.js is HTML and CSS and elements and stuff. So we can't take any of our UI code and move that over. But the code we can move is anything that's algorithm. So like this whole processing step of taking cell text and turning it into Unicode is something we share. So what we're going to do is see how do we refactor this code out. And you can imagine if you had a VSTO add-in that had like some really complex code that was doing some heavy processing, you might not want to spend the time rewriting all that in JavaScript. You might want to refactor it like we're going to do here and put it into a shared library. So kind of like cooking with an oven where you have prepared things, I'm going to do the same thing here. The next step is to add a shared library, but I'm just going to open the solution that already has it in the interest of time. Is part 2. So now we have our cell analyzer project, and we've also created this shared library, which is just a class. In that class, I've created a public method called get Unicode from text, pass it a string value, and it returns the string answer, and there's that same code. So then you add this as a reference into your VSTO add-in. And if I go back to the code click, see we still have our document code, we still have our UI code. The part that changed is when we send it to the UI, we now call our shared library, cell operations, get Unicode from text. We're getting that cell value. So that's how we use the code. Now we haven't created the Office Web Add-in yet. Before we do that, we're going to need to create a REST API. So let's jump forward to that project. And again, this is just an ASP.NET Core project that's been added, and it's called Cell Analyzer REST API. By the way, I'll show at the end of this, there's a tutorial that walks you through all these steps if you want to do this yourself. So now we have 3 projects in my solution. I've got my original add-in, this REST API project, which is using the shared library. So what we did is we created a new controller called the Analyze Unicode controller. And there we have a get method for Analyze Unicode, and we pass it the value to process, and then it returns to us a string. And then it just basically, you can see the call here to the shared library where we call into cell analyzer shared library, cell operations, get Unicode from text. So now both the REST API wrapper and the VSTO add-in are calling that same shared code. And if I run this, we can see how it works from just a browser. So it's going to launch a browser and go to my API path for my, and that's the default one, but I want to change this to, we'll just do this one. So I'm going to call my Analyze Unicode and pass a value of test. And then we can see it sends back a string with the Unicode values for each of those. So now we just need to wire this up to the Office Web Add-in side. That's another step in Visual Studio where you would go create and add into this solution a Office Web Add-in. I'm just going to skip forward to where we've already done that. So now we see that was a lot of projects in here. So now we also have the Web Add-in project, which is basically where the manifest file is. And then we have an ASP.NET web project. So we get Now our REST API is ASP.NET Core, and then we also have this web project, ASP.NET, for Add-in itself. There's a home file, HTML, and a home JS. So if we look like at the home file, basically I just modified the body so that there's a button with the Show Unicode button, and then it has a div for the text result. And then in my home JS, we see that we're going to call the Excel Office.js API to run this function. We're going to get the selected range. This is where that document interaction is a little bit different. And we have to load all the values for that range, which is typically one cell. Once that range is loaded, we pass it into this new function where we're going to make an AJAX call to the, you can see here, the REST API. Now you could deploy this to Azure or any cloud service and just call it there. That's fine. Right now it's just running locally. In the tutorial, it does show you the steps to deploy it to Azure if you want to do that. But once it gets the value back, it makes that call, then it's going to do a little fix up on the strings to make sure they use BRs for line feed so that you can display this as HTML, and then it puts it into that div of the text. To run this, I just want to point out, like, the startup projects gets a little complicated, so this one's set to run multiples. We want to run a REST API as a start, so we have a REST API service, and then we also run the web project and the web add-in, so these two have to run as well. All these steps are in the tutorial. So let me go ahead and run this one. So launch Excel. So we see the REST API wrapper is running. Excel's going to start. And we also still see the old VSTO add-ins there, but I can say show task pane. And now I'm going to open up the web add-in, and it's loading its page. So now it has a show Unicode. Oops, it has a show Unicode button. So if I go over here and I type in test or something and say show Unicode, you can see it made the call and it shows the result. And if you're on like Fiddler or some kind of trace, you can see that this call actually went over the web. Now I'm going to point out this VSTO add-in is still running locally. It's not making a call to the REST API. And the reason for not using the REST API is because VSTO add-ins can run offline. And so that's why it shares in the project instead of making calls out to REST. Is that way you can still preserve that offline ability, which is kind of nice. Let's see, a couple last things to point out. Got here. All right, so if you go to the, we'll put the link out later to this, but if you go to PNP Office Add-ins to the, this is VSTO shared branch, which is where the sample's at right now. Sorry about that. Okay. The samples folder down to VSTO shared code start. And in here, there's a README that will walk you through how to open that project and run everything. Oh, by the way, I should have pointed out, you could also use YoOffice and VS Code for this. You don't have to put everything in Visual Studio. Just for convenience, I did it that way. But then this will walk you through just how to run each project in the solution. And then if you want to follow the steps and create your own, there's this tutorial, which we will publish in the next couple of days, which has, basically everything I was just showing you, like how you create the VSTO add-in, how you do your analysis, how you create the shared class library, create the REST API, then you create your Office web add-in, and then finally you can publish it to Azure. So all those steps will be coming out soon. So I hope that makes sense. Were there any questions on anything I was showing?
Don't believe so, David. There's been some chat about other things in the backlog, but yeah, posting a link right now to that code sample.
Okay. So then moving along. So if you are interested in presenting in one of our calls, one of our upcoming calls, let us know. There's a form here with a link to it that you can go to and engage with us. Just provide some information about yourself, what it is you're interested in talking about, a solution or a technique. Those are always great to share. And we'll be in touch with you and set something up. You can also use this forum just to provide feedback about the docs. If you have ideas or suggestions to share, we're definitely interested in hearing from you. So let us know. Last check on the Q&A. Is there any additional stuff to wrap up with?
Juan, anything come up that you want to share? I know you were pretty engaged in there.
Yeah, I was asking, there were a few interesting questions here for Christian. He was asking about differentiating between signatures for internal or external recipients. And actually, that's a great idea for an add-in. You cannot do this today with a product. But with code, currently we have the APIs so that you can get the recipient email addresses a message, and based on that, infer if you insert kind of internal or external signatures. I guess with the API set we are exposing, we could do it. And then the other one that was interesting was Eric. He was talking about the graph capabilities for signatures. So yes, you're right. So today you can use EWS to insert signatures, and you cannot do it in the graph. My latest understanding is that it's in the backlog, but we don't have a specific timeline for it. So I guess eventually we will also have this capability there. But again, that's still, you can enable, solutions outside of Outlook to be using that to complement, also in an add-in within Outlook. Sorry. Good discussion. I will make sure that you guys get the link so that if you have additional feedback, you could share it with us.
So here's a few links to some additional developer resources. We have a link to the Office 365 developer program, which if you're getting started just building and testing out your add-ins, it's a great way to get a free tenant and just try building your add-ins there. There's also Script Lab, which is an add-in you can download that runs samples in the context of a host. So like you could run Script Lab in Excel, and it has Excel samples that you can try out, which is pretty cool. It's kind of a quick, easy way to just kind of start looking at some of the code and see how it works. We got a link to our Office Addins documentation. If you're looking to engage with us, like say you have, if you're looking to ask questions, how to do things, you can go to stackoverflow.com, and we have just tag your questions with either Office.js or Outlook Web Add-ins, and the community as well as our team looks at those. And if you find like a bug of something, what appears to be a bug or something, then you can let us know on the Office.js repo there, and we track those sorts of issues in that repo. And if you have any feature requests, you can go to User Voice, our User Voice site, and let us know if there's something you want to see us build. So anyway, some developer resources, just kind of wrapping things up here. So there'll be a recording available for this call on the Office Developer YouTube channel in a few days. And we'll also put a blog post out that has a link to the slides, Q&A summary, and links to any resources we talked about. We usually get these things out in a few days. And a reminder that the next call is coming up on Wednesday, January 8th, 2020. If you want to submit questions for that, go to the Office Addins forum, let us know what your questions are. And again, if you don't have an invite, here's a link for the calendar invite. And that brings us to the end of the call. So thanks everybody for attending, and we will see you on the next call.
Thank you.